From 2028, Sony alone decides what a game costs and even how long you are allowed to use it. Now, those are not my words. They are lifted from a legal claim that PlayStation are fighting in court right now. And what it alleges is bad for you. That, not the market, not a retailer putting on a sale or anything like that, that those things will not dictate the price of a game. Because going forward, there is one storefront, one price, and zero way around it. Because that is what the end of discs actually means. And as it turns out, that's not even the only major legal case that we have to deal with in this video. A lawsuit over PlayStation Store just settled in California. A $2 billion class action currently sits with a tribunal in London. In Poland, regulators are investigating. Over in Mexico, the lawmakers are circling. And in the Netherlands, the disc announcement dropped literally in the middle of a live court hearing. They are absolutely in a PR and legal storm of their own making. But they do know that, and here's a quote from an expert. They, of course, knew what the online reaction would look like, and they now wait for this storm to pass. Now, that was the read in the overall situation that analyst Dr. Serkan Toto gave to IGN, only days after PlayStation announced the end of discs. And what he said did make sense, because that is so very often how things go. Even with PlayStation, the whole no disc, no buy boycott splintered the moment the 2 digital-only Black Ops ports arrived. But the storm has not fully passed, and while comment sections full of angry gamers may be survivable to Sony, what could hurt a lot more is, of course, the courtrooms. Now, when it comes to using our computers, especially as developers, stuff is changing so fast, and boot.dev are keeping up with that. Now, of course, you don't have to like AI coding tools to maybe want to understand what they're actually doing. In fact, skepticism is probably a better reason to actually go and take a look under the bonnet. And that's the idea behind this new project from today's sponsor, boot.dev, where you can build yourself a small coding agent. Literally, you can build the harness yourself. It's so cool. This will read files, edit code, run Python, and do loops on its own feedback until the job is done. In this, you get 20 lessons, about 12 hours, and it got a major update this month. And you know what? As I've been automating more and more of the boring back-end parts of running a business and replacing some SaaS tools that I feel ripped off by, this is the one I take. I've been building some agent-driven tools for real work via Hermes. It's been so fun. And it's basically just been automating really boring stuff about like running the business that I've always hated doing and always slacked in doing. Now though, I'm kind of like on top of all my shit. It's awesome. Seriously, automating things is so fun. And with this on boot, actually implementing the loop yourself is how you go from, I don't know, being some sort of prompter or slopperator, as I like to call them, to, well, being an engineer who knows how to use a tool in a responsible, effective way. Because as all this stuff grows, we can never get away from the simple thing where judging the output of any of these systems is your job and your responsibility. And Boot absolutely handles this right. And of course, they do so much more. Every course they have has a free interactive demo, so you can actually try all the stuff out before you spend anything. And the whole platform is so full of like heart, craft, sauce. It's literally made for people like us. The whole thing plays like an RPG. So all you need to do is scan the QR code or head to boot.dev and use code BellyLearNews to get 25% off your entire first year on an annual plan. When Serkan Toto said the storm would pass, he was talking about the money side of things. The, little financials, as maybe some people cancel their PS Pluses or choose not to buy a game. Basically, per his maths, those sorts of things wouldn't even matter, and he framed that even, say, 500,000 cancellations would be like a 1% drop in the overall Sony numbers, the sort of thing that wouldn't really be a dent in their digital revenue. It just wouldn't matter. But what would matter is, say, no disk drives to build for the PS6, no discs to press, things like that that'd save PlayStation money. But not just that, because the cost of pressing a disc is probably less than the opportunity cost of that factory doing that instead of something else, and we now know that at least one of those factories has been repurposed for optical components. And the argument is, of course, that enough of the audience already buy digital to cover the shortfall from those who never will. So if you want to stick by your principles, it's basically, yeah, sure, but nobody else really will, and you'll just be depriving yourself of games. And it's the sort of thing where I hate those vibes, but I do think it's broadly oddly true. It's how boycotts tend to go when it's over something that people fundamentally do want. If you are a little bit from the past, you may remember Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 having no dedicated servers in PC, and that famous Steam screenshot of the Steam group for the boycott on launch night, where most of them were playing the damn game that they said they would boycott. And the thing is, the data behind Sony's bet does look kind of brutal. As an example, when the new Wolverine trailer was flooded with more than 10,000 comments, most asking for discs, Zircana's Matt Piscatella answered with some numbers. He said that in the week ending July 11th, exactly 2 PlayStation games sold more than 10,000 physical copies in the US, and across every PlayStation release, PS4 and PS5, first party and third party, 7 games have passed 100,000 physical copies sold so far this year. Those obviously are plenty of sales, but they're pretty small compared to the rest.
Now, those analytics ended up proving a little bit controversial. A lot of people didn't really believe what was going on or had questions. So Piscatella went a bit further in response to a few conspiracy theories that he was basically underselling how these physical games had been performing in the US. So Matt then shared this trend line of total new physical game sales per year, and it is under 40 million per year in the US over the last 2 years. But on PlayStation, they haven't sold more than 20 million physical units in a year since 2021. And of the 7 games that have exceeded the 100,000 physical sales bar within the first half of the year, he says that so far, not one of those, that they can track anyway, has sold more than 275,000 units. Overall then, the trend line for demand in the US does look rather clear.
Now that's far from the only discussion and analysis has went on in this. Many have suggested that the top-line data is basically a result of PlayStation manipulating numbers to make digital look good. The claim is that around 80% of games are sold digitally. Now the argument is that this is comparing all digital games with only games sold in stores, which is of course a false equivalence. There's loads of games available in the PlayStation Store that you will not be able to find in a physical store, so it doesn't really seem sense. It doesn't really seem fair. But that's not the only thing people point to. There's the data that is from the 2023 Insomniac hack. That's really interesting because it showed that only 33% of sales were digital for copies of games like, say, Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, or 57% for Ghost of Tsushima Director's Cut. Basically, with numbers like that, it sure seems that when given the option, people bought physical at over 2 to 3 times the rate that Sony's top-line number implies. But just because some data seems to support the argument doesn't make it solely manipulation. We always have to remember, in all things, not just something like this, that while you can have one bit of really convincing looking data, there is often a wider picture and there's often context. One of the reasons you can't just look at one medical trial or scientific paper and just take it as being perfect and gold. Now, one wrinkle to this is Sony's financials actually suggests that they overstate the impact of physical games. You see, they also count revenue from first and third-party game software sold bundled with PlayStation consoles and PlayStation VR. Now, the latter may be literally several games, but there is something we should think about there. The 80-20 split is actually subsidized by every game bundled with a new console, and those copies count as physical. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying that Sony are right and that the community's wrong. Far from it, actually. I think it's very much the case, though, that what Sony are doing is really unpopular with many of us. Because of that, there is data out there that does cast doubt on what Sony is saying. And it's absolutely the case that, yeah, Sony are totally going to, supply the numbers they've got that make their stuff look the best, that makes their new direction look very sensible. They'll obviously want to do that. And while on the conspiratorial side, things do look convincing if you solely contain it to just those numbers being talked about, those are also not all of the numbers, and loads of those numbers are just, well, ones that we do not have. Sometimes, though, there can be a more simple and cold truth than just the conspiracy. I think it is the case that there still is a sizable market for physical games. That's obviously true to just about anyone, including PlayStation. And I think, quite simply, PlayStation have decided that it's now small enough for them to leave behind. I mean, what? 10,000 comments under a trailer and no response? They obviously think they can tank it, and it seems they are pretty sure that all the people who care about this have made a lot of noise, and it's not enough to make them reconsider their plan. And the prize for leaving those people to them is worth having, because what it means is full price control with no second-hand market. It means stronger monthly active users thanks to, well, downloads and store access, and it means even better margin on production and sales. And what's been so left out of the conversation is that this did not start with a disc announcement. This is actually a plan Sony's been working toward since 2019. And it's also part of the same thing that's got them in court. In 2019, PlayStation stopped allowing third-party stores to sell digital copies of their games. And since 2021, that has been biting them in the legal ass. Though at least their lawyers will, of course, be able to justify their existence, so a big win for them. But what I mean when I say bit them in the ass, that is when consumers filed a lawsuit that actually just ended with a $7.85 million settlement in California. It argued that players were getting worse deals because of PlayStation reducing competition. Over in the UK then, there's a class action suit worth $2 billion. It finished being heard in May, and it's being considered by the tribunal currently. Then, over in Poland, their Office of Consumer Protections has been investigating since 2024. Mexican lawmakers are promising to take complaints to the country's antitrust commission, and I have to imagine that's far from the end of it, especially because PlayStation's decision to kill physical games has absolutely galvanized all of these movements, and it's made their arguments stronger. And here's the thing, that case that the announcement of physical games dying quite literally interrupted live in court, it is the one to watch because it could really matter. So, it was the Dutch class action case. It was brought by a non-profit. I'm not going to mangle their name, but it was brought by them, and the hearing kicked off at the very end of June this year, so it is very much a present thing that's currently ongoing. And their aim for this class action is to reopen the platform's digital games market to other companies and to win compensation for the region's players. WCCF Tech were able to get an exclusive statement from the group as the trial began. And clearly they believe PlayStation's recent decisions have just given their case more weight. Here's the quote: "The end of physical discs removes the last place where a PlayStation game could still be bought and sold at a competitive price. No discs means no second-hand market and no alternative to the PlayStation Store. So, from 2028, Sony alone decides what a game costs and even how long you are allowed to use it. That is exactly the harm our fair PlayStation claim is about. A price can never be fair when the buyer is left with no ownership and no alternative." Brutal statement, and a fair one, I would say. And perhaps some good news is that another Dutch outfit seems to have broadly proved the litigants' points here. You see, what they found is that on average, for both first and third-party games, you could find a game cheaper physically than you could in the PlayStation Store. That's something just about any of us can do by looking at a local store, but in this case, it was the finding from an outlet called Tweakers, whose Price Watch service tracks the lowest price in games. Basically, they ran a study on the Game of the Year nominees since 2021, wherever a game had both a standard edition PS5 disc and a PSN Store listing. And what they basically found is that deep PSN sales can mitigate this a bit, where you can actually see PlayStation Store prices drop below that of third-party physical retailers. But on average, without sale prices, physical actually still wins. And what that means is that without the existence of those discs, potential customers would indeed be at the mercy of PlayStation's walled garden, with no way to benefit from competition on price. If you are a person who buys things, competition is good, it works out in your favor. Now, on this story, particularly with physical games, there is one obvious reason for the trend, and it's physical storage. Not literally storage on the discs, I mean, like storage of the actual discs. Once a store has copies in the warehouse, they of course have to pay to keep those copies there, and at a certain point, the cost of keeping a game on the shelf just outweighs the profit from selling it, especially when a newer game could take that prominent slot in the actual storefront. Plus, competitors might offer prices you'll have to match or undercut, which can drag the price lower still. Obviously, a digital storefront does not have that pressure. If there were other digital stores, that may not be the case, and that is why consumer groups in the Netherlands and the UK are pushing to get us back to the market we had before 2019. That's because in 2019, PlayStation created a wedge that all of these challengers can use. And unfortunately, it's that is the best angle of attack, because the EU have confirmed that they I mean, they can't force PlayStation to keep printing discs. In a statement given to the Irish Mirror, EU Commissioner for Consumer Protection Michael McGrath spelt out that the EU's rules on corporate activity do allow for PlayStation to sell games on their platform however they want. However they damn well please. That's not his quote. Here's his quote. It does come down to commercial and contractual freedoms, and companies are free to offer games and services in a manner that they see fit, provided that consumer rights are fully protected in line with national and EU law. Now, he then goes on to link the statement to Stop Killing Games efforts in Europe, but at the core, this is a fundamentally different story. The EU cannot force PlayStation to produce physical discs, in just the same way it can't force Pocket Pair to produce a physical edition of Palworld so there, can be parity with Pokemon cards. That choice, of course, stays with the company. And right now, the only thing we know that influences it is the potential for more revenue. And that means that the product decision side of things is basically untouchable. But what is, I guess, legally touchable and what could be useful to people trying to push back against what Sony is doing is prices. And that is where this fight is heading. So, the real fight, the one that can actually be won, is not about discs. It is about competition, and the courts will decide that question. But for many advocacy bodies, even a win there wouldn't be enough. The fight that actually matters going forward is digital purchases having, basically, the rights that a disc perhaps used to carry, and the infrastructure to use those rights. And here's how the argument is put forward for the Electronic Frontier Foundation by Rory Meir and Suzanne Callisto. Here's their argument. In a download-only world, American internet simply isn't consistently good enough. This ultimately ends with the customers turned into renters. And without resale rights or DRM-free ownership, your digital goods are not actually yours. The solution does not come from PlayStation. It has to come from standards and political infrastructure changing, led by engaged voters and activists. And that fight belongs to more people than the disc buyers. You could never have owned a PlayStation disc in your life, and this would still reach your wallet. Because when the last competing price disappears, the walled garden sets your price too. From 2028, on PlayStation, just one company decides what a game costs and how long it's yours. That is a far more important and rather different storm than the one that PlayStation currently finds themselves within. But the drama, everything that they have sparked off with this end of physical games, it is absolutely going to propel global efforts, be it in what the EFF were putting forward there, or just, of course, on the whole price control and antitrust thing. Those could hurt Sony massively. And certainly, I have to imagine that within Xbox, there are people thinking, could we put a disk drive in Project Helix? And if we did that, would we look like the reigning gamer champion, just like what Sony did to us all the way back in the days of the Xbox One announcement and Don Matrick? Obviously, we'll keep you abreast of any developments in this story. It's a pretty important one. But if you want another important story, it's really fascinating, check out this one next.